This is round 7 of 15 from the 2014 World Rapid Chess Championship. Carlsen has white in this game versus Laurent Fressinet. And he opens with d4, d5. We see a Slav, knight d2, Queen's Gambit declined, Slav, knight b to d2, a Breyer Variation, bishop f5, and, well, what is this bishop doing? It's trying to eventually get out of this eventual pawn chain, but you leave yourself a bit susceptible to this type of idea, where white can pick up this knight for bishop exchange. That's what we have soon enough, the knight-bishop exchange. Bishop to e4. You could take the bishop in this case, but do know that your knight starts to become a bit stranded. You know, he's lacking some squares now with this pawn controlling f3. That natural retreat square is no longer. And so moves like g5 at some point are available. Maybe first e6, guarding f5, and then moves like this are eventually a threat. Eventually what we'll see is we do have this type of capture, and g3 is played so that the knight can drop back to this g2 square. But first, there's no need to take this bishop, no rush with that just yet. Now that this bishop is certainly long away from guarding any of, let's say, these queenside light squares, what do we have? White putting pressure on that weakened b7 square. Queen b6 to defend. These queens both are stubborn. Neither wants to take one another and help out the other side's rook. So the tension remains on these b3 and b6 squares for quite some time. e3, we need to just get this guy out. e6, bishop e2. Notice for all these moves there was no rush with taking on this square. Only after h6 and the bishop is ready to run away does white now go forward with taking. Pawn takes, and now this is a threat. g3 is needed. A new home available now on g2. c5. This bishop is not developed. He's not around to reinforce d4 so easily. This knight is now inconvenienced. White has the bishop pair, but black is very quick to put pressure on the white center. So c5 it is. Knight c6 to follow. Bishop to d2. Knight c6. Bishop c3. Pawn takes. Pawn takes. Queenside castle. Very rapid development. Additional pressure is being placed on d4. And keep in mind, this is just an interesting side note. Carlsen's opponent here, these guys are good friends. There was a video not too long ago, you may have seen it, where they were playing just a fun blitz game, and Carlsen was saying what to his opponent? The popular phrase, you may have already heard it out there, he was saying, too weak, too slow, talking to his opponent. I don't believe any of that sort of stuff was being said during this game, but I'm sure deep down Laurent was trying to get Carlsen back in this rapid championship. So anyhow, just a quick little side note there. Is black too weak or too slow? We're going to see about that, because black does get his chance in this game. So let's see what takes shape. Knight g2, bishop takes, pawn takes. So this pawn is there to reinforce the d4 point. These are some weakened squares now, some squares on the d file. The c4 square is now a bit weakened as a result of this capture. You could also reason the squares in front of this isolated pawn are weakened, but I'm not so sure you could really take advantage of that. Eventually we'll see this pawn move, and then c5 becomes a wonderful home for the black knights. So here comes e5, chipping away at that square. Now the queens are captured. Now comes d5. The knight is hit, but he's now going to reposition on this square. Evaluation is pretty much dead equal. And strong post here. This knight's looking to occupy d6. White's looking to eventually put pressure on g7. f6 is there. Black is intending now to give some lateral support to the g7 pawn, anticipating white doubling on the g file. Knight f5 takes. What do we have here? Some pressure. White's looking to double. Lateral defense. If you try and defend strictly on, let's say, you didn't play here to go back here, but just for instructional purposes, you run into these tactics when your rook is on this square. He's tactically vulnerable, right? He's unprotected, and so that's why he's tactically vulnerable. Moves like rook takes pawn on f6 or h6 are happening very soon. So that's why it's important to be defending this g7 pawn laterally, keeping your pieces coordinated as you defend. King to d3, coordinated and defended. King d2, kings get involved. Knight a4 turned out to be a dud in this one. Knight a4, bishop d1, he was never really threatening c3. If he is taken, he's going to end up in some hot water. b5, rook c1, you play b4, you undermine the knight. This would be bad news, the knight's stranded. So, really shouldn't have gone there. After bishop d1, the knight has to go back. Bishop c2, so slight loss of time. This pawn is won, but he still has a very strong position. This king is coming over to watch over this pawn, so that one of these rooks will be freed up to do something else. What might that something else be? Well, let's say put pressure on the a pawn, maybe even the c3 pawn. Or in other words, maybe pivot on the a3 square. So bishop c2, king f8, rook d6, rook to b5. So now that this king is there to defend g7, white is shifting his attention over here on b6. Rook takes c4. So I'm not sure why exactly this pawn, why did Carlsen allow this pawn to be captured? The computer does recommend simply defending it instead of rook to b1. Simply watch over this, because you're not just losing this pawn. What more is happening? It's the rook, and he's getting very active. h5 or h4 or f4, pressure on some of these white pawns over here. But okay, this pawn is taken, or he wasn't defended. Instead, rook to b1 was played. Rook takes c4, rook b3, rook h4, bishop d1. He's the more important pawn. Without him, he's a passed pawn. Now, rook b4, rook takes rook, and now pawn takes rook. This is a big blunder, and black doesn't capitalize on it. If you'd like to, pause the video, see what black can do in this position. Okay, I believe the winning idea is knight to b8, and, well, this rook is stuck, right? I've seen computer do this before. It kind of misevaluates the position of one of their pieces, but this rook is kind of stranded. I think Carlsen maybe calculated that this rook could escape with a4, a5, and then he'd be there in time to capture on b6, but I'm pretty sure that's a miscalculation, because you wouldn't be in time, in fact. Knight b8, a4, you need to do something to rescue the rook, because all black is needing to do is play to c7. So knight a6, a5, knight c7, and now you may think the rook is safe to take here, but there's this fork. The rook is gone, and so too is the game. That was apparently missed by both players after this capture. Black did not go forward with knight b8, a6, c7. It was just missed by both players, I'm pretty sure. So pawn takes, king e7, and now this is no longer working because a4 is played. You try this now, you're one move short. This rook will be rescued. He needs to be here one move sooner for that to work. So after a4, it's king d8. a5, there's no more fear anymore of this rook being trapped. Bishop a4, this bishop gets on a better diagonal, but it's tough to break down this structure, isn't it? Black has a good defense at this point, a nice dark square blockade, you could say. And a lot of shuffling at this point. You'll see the evaluation not shift so much. Perfect square for the knight, The rook is there to defend the base point, and there's no way to break down the black setup here. And with just a few more moves being played, at this point the players agreed to a draw after this 64th move. So that's all for this video. Feel free to click the annotation link at the end of this video for round 8 of this tournament, or check in the video's description for links to the other 14 games.